The protagonist, still reeling from the chaotic events of the past few days, begins his narration with a growing sense of dread. His voice is laced with unease as he recounts the initial excitement that turned into a waking nightmare. He and a group of friends had planned this trip as an escape, a way to break free from the mundanity of their everyday lives. The island was remote, nearly untouched by civilization, with dense forests, rugged cliffs, and a pristine beach that seemed to stretch into infinity. It was supposed to be a paradise, a place to relax and disconnect from the world. But from the moment their boat touched the shore, the protagonist felt something was off. The air was thick, almost suffocating, with a strange stillness that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. There were no birds singing, no insects buzzing, just an eerie, unnatural silence that seemed to echo across the island. As they set up camp, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes were tracking their every move from the shadows of the dense forest. He tried to brush it off as paranoia, the product of too many horror movies and ghost stories, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing hour. That first night, as they sat around the campfire, the conversation flowed easily, but the protagonist found it hard to focus. His eyes kept drifting towards the darkened tree line, where the flickering light of the fire couldn't quite reach. It was as if the darkness was alive, shifting and writhing just out of sight. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks into the air, but the warmth did nothing to quell the cold dread that had settled in the pit of his stomach. When he finally retired to his tent, the unease followed him, clinging to him like a second skin. Sleep came reluctantly, and when it did, it brought no comfort. The protagonist's dreams were a twisted reflection of reality, filled with distorted images of the island. He dreamed of dark figures lurking just beyond the trees, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. He saw flashes of ancient rituals, of blood-soaked altars hidden deep within the forest. And all the while, a voice whispered to him from the shadows, its words unintelligible but filled with a sinister intent. When he woke, drenched in sweat, the terror of the dream clung to him, the line between sleep and reality blurring. The next day, as they explored the island, the protagonist couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The paths they followed seemed to twist and change, leading them in circles. The others didn't seem to notice, laughing and chatting as if nothing was amiss. But the protagonist's anxiety only grew, his senses on high alert. He started noticing small, inexplicable things, the way the shadows seemed to move on their own, the strange symbols carved into the bark of ancient trees, symbols that felt disturbingly familiar, as if they had seen them before, in another life or another nightmare. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of red and orange, the protagonist was barely holding it together. The island's beauty had become grotesque, its vibrant colors too vivid, its natural sounds too quiet, as if the entire place was a facade, hiding something monstrous beneath its surface. He tried to voice his concerns to the group, but they brushed him off, joking that he was just being paranoid. But the protagonist knew better. The island was wrong, twisted in some fundamental way that defied logic, and it was only a matter of time before the truth revealed itself in all its horrific glory. That night, the protagonist stayed awake long after the others had fallen asleep. The fire had died down to embers, casting a weak, flickering light across the camp. He sat on the edge of his sleeping bag, staring out at the darkness, every nerve in his body on edge. The forest was silent, but it was a silence filled with anticipation, as if the island itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, just as his eyes began to droop with exhaustion, he saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the tree line, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall, impossibly thin, and draped in tattered rags that fluttered in the night breeze. Its face was obscured, but the protagonist could feel its gaze, cold and malevolent, boring into him. For a moment, he was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even breathe. And then, As suddenly as it had appeared, the figure melted back into the shadows, leaving the protagonist trembling and drenched in cold sweat. He knew then, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they were not alone on the island. Something else was there. Something ancient and evil, and it was watching them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The following day dawned with a false sense of normalcy. The sun was shining brightly, the waves gently lapping at the shore, and the birds had returned, their songs filling the air. But the protagonist couldn't shake the lingering dread from the previous night. His mind kept replaying the image of the shadowy figure, and though he tried to rationalize it, perhaps it was just a trick of the light, or his imagination playing cruel tricks, the feeling of being watched remained, gnawing at his sanity. As they ventured deeper into the island, the protagonist began noticing small, unsettling details that chipped away at his sense of reality. It started with the paths they took. What had seemed like clear trails the day before now appeared overgrown and twisted, as if the island itself was shifting and changing to confuse them. Trees that should have been familiar were suddenly foreign, with strange, gnarled branches that seemed to reach out like claws. The ground beneath their feet was soft, almost as if it were breathing, and the air carried a faint metallic scent that made the protagonist's stomach churn. Objects in their camp began to move on their own. At first, it was minor. Someone's backpack would be found a few feet from where it was left, or a cooking pot would be overturned. The others brushed it off as forgetfulness, blaming the wind or their own carelessness. But the protagonist knew better. He watched as a canteen slowly slid across the table, as if pulled by an invisible hand. He saw shadows flitting at the edge of his vision, disappearing the moment he turned to look. And then there were the whispers. The whispers began as faint, almost indistinguishable from the rustling leaves or the gentle murmur of the waves. But as the day wore on, they grew louder, more insistent. They came from no discernible direction, sometimes seeming to echo from the depths of the forest, other times from right behind him. The voices were low, guttural, speaking in a language he didn't recognize, but somehow understood on a primal level. They spoke of ancient rites, of blood and sacrifice, of a hunger that could never be sated. The words sent shivers down his spine, filling him with a deep primal fear. That night, as the group gathered around the campfire, the protagonist's unease grew unbearable. The firelight cast eerie, flickering shadows on the surrounding trees, creating the illusion of figures dancing just beyond the circle of light. He tried to engage in the conversation, but his mind was elsewhere, fixated on the strange occurrences that were steadily eroding his grip on reality. The others laughed and joked, oblivious to the growing danger, but the protagonist could see it in their eyes. The doubt, the fear, slowly creeping in. When he finally retreated to his tent, sleep eluded him. Every rustle of the wind, every creak of the branches outside set his heart racing. His thoughts spiraled into dark places, fueled by the strange events of the day. The island wasn't just playing tricks on them. It was alive, aware, and it wanted something from them. He could feel it in the very earth beneath him, in the air that seemed to thrum with a dark energy. And then, just as he was on the verge of sleep, he heard it again. The whispers. They were louder now, almost as if they were inside his tent, swirling around him in a cacophony of unintelligible words. He squeezed his eyes shut, hands clamped over his ears. But the voices only grew louder, more insistent. They whispered of doom, of horrors unimaginable. And as they reached a fever pitch, the protagonist felt something cold and slimy brush against his cheek. His eyes snapped open, and he saw it, a dark, formless mass hovering above him, its edges shifting and undulating as if it were made of smoke. It had no eyes, no mouth, but he could feel its malevolent gaze, its hunger. He bolted upright, gasping for breath, only to find the tent empty. The whispers suddenly gone, but the fear remained, lodged deep in his chest like a splinter. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night, sitting in the darkness with his back pressed against the tent wall, eyes wide and unblinking. He knew now that the island was not just a place, it was a living entity, ancient and malevolent, and it was toying with them, bending reality to its will. The next morning, he confided in one of his friends, hoping for reassurance, but was met with skepticism. The friend laughed it off, suggesting it was just a nightmare, a result of stress and isolation. But the protagonist could see the cracks forming in his friend's facade. The nervous glances, the way his hands shook as he packed his gear. They were all beginning to feel it, the slow unraveling of their sanity. And as they set off to explore more of the island, the protagonist couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led, herded like cattle towards some unspeakable fate. As they walked, the whispers returned, but this time, the protagonist wasn't the only one who heard them. The others began to exchange uneasy glances, their expressions growing more strained with each passing hour. The island was working its way into their minds, planting seeds of doubt and fear. The protagonist watched as one of his friends stumbled, clutching his head as if in pain, his eyes wide with terror. He mumbled something about seeing shadows, about hearing voices that weren't there, but the others dismissed it, too afraid to acknowledge the truth. By the time they reached the heart of the island, the group was on edge, their nerves frayed to the breaking point. The forest had grown denser. The trees twisted into grotesque shapes that seemed to leer down at them. The air was thick with tension, and the whispers had become a constant background noise, gnawing at their sanity. The protagonist's heart pounded in his chest as they came upon a clearing where a large, ancient stone altar stood, covered in strange, indecipherable runes. The sight of the altar filled him with an overwhelming sense of dread. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this was the center of the island's power, the source of the malevolence that had been tormenting them. But as he turned to warn the others, he realized with a start that they were no longer there. He was alone in the clearing, the whispers now a deafening roar in his ears, and then, from the shadows of the forest, the dark figure from the first night emerged, its form more distinct, more terrifying. It beckoned to him, and despite every instinct screaming at him to run, his feet moved of their own accord, drawing him closer to the altar and the horrors that awaited. The protagonist's mind begins to unravel as the island's insidious grip tightens around him. Each day, the boundaries between reality and delusion blur further, leaving him trapped in a psychological labyrinth. He finds himself increasingly isolated from the others, who now seem distant, their faces twisted in suspicion and fear. Paranoia takes root deep within him, spreading like a poison. Every glance from his friends feels loaded with hidden meaning. Every whisper behind his back seems to carry a threat. He begins to suspect that they are conspiring against him, that they are in on the island's dark secret, and he's the only one left in the dark. The protagonist's thoughts grow darker with each passing hour. He becomes hyper-aware of his surroundings, noticing things that no one else does, or perhaps things that don't exist at all. The shadows cast by the trees seem to move of their own accord, stretching and twisting into monstrous shapes that vanish the moment he tries to focus on them. The ground beneath his feet feels unstable, like it could give way at any moment, swallowing him whole into the bowels of the earth. Every sound, every rustle of leaves becomes a potential threat, a sign that the island is closing in on him. His isolation deepens as he withdraws further into himself. Consumed by a growing sense of dread, he avoids the group, convinced that they're watching him, judging him. In their eyes, he sees fear, not just of the island, but of him. He catches them whispering to each other when they think he isn't listening, their eyes flicking towards him with unease. He's certain they're plotting something, perhaps to leave him behind, to sacrifice him to whatever dark force rules the island. The once friendly camaraderie has turned into a tense, silent standoff, with each member of the group keeping their distance, as if afraid of what he might do. The protagonist's sleep is plagued by nightmares, vivid and horrifying, where the island's true nature is laid bare. In his dreams, he's hunted through the forest by unseen entities, their laughter echoing in his ears as they drive him deeper into madness. He dreams of ancient rituals performed under a blood-red moon, of sacrifices made on the stone altar they discovered, with blood flowing like a river into the hungry earth. The faces of his friends appear in these dreams, twisted into grotesque parodies of their real selves, their eyes hollow and accusing. They stand around him, chanting in that same guttural language he's heard in the whispers, their voices filled with malice as they close in on him, knives in hand. When he wakes, drenched in sweat, the terror lingers, the lines between the dream world and reality dissolving into a haze of fear. He stumbles out of his tent, half mad with sleep deprivation, and finds the island changed once again. The landscape seems to shift before his eyes, the trees growing taller and more menacing, their branches reaching down like skeletal fingers. The sky, once bright and clear, is now overcast, the clouds swirling in unnatural patterns that remind him of the shapes he's seen in his nightmares. The air is thick with the scent of decay, a cloying, sweet odor that makes his stomach churn. In his desperation, the protagonist begins to search for answers, hoping to find something, anything, that will explain what's happening to him. He scours the island for clues, digging through the underbrush, examining the strange symbols carved into the trees and tracing the worn paths that lead deeper into the forest. But every discovery only deepens his confusion and fear. The symbols are ancient, older than any civilization he's ever known, and they seem to pulse with a dark energy that makes his skin crawl. The paths twist and turn in impossible ways, leading him in circles, always back to the clearing with the altar. It's there, at the altar, that he finds the first tangible proof of the island's malevolence. A series of old, weathered journals hidden beneath a pile of stones. The pages are brittle and yellowed with age, but the writing is still legible, scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic hand. As he reads, the protagonist's heart sinks. The journals tell the story of those who came before, of explorers and settlers who landed on the island, only to fall prey to its dark power. The entries are filled with accounts of strange occurrences, of whispers in the night, of shadowy figures seen at the edge of the forest. But most chilling of all are the final entries, where the writers speak of their growing madness, of turning on each other in fear and desperation, and of the ultimate horrifying realization that the island isn't just a place, it's a predator, feeding on their minds, their fears, and their very souls. The protagonist recoils from the journals, his hands trembling as he drops them to the ground. The realization hits him like a physical blow. The island is alive, and it's been slowly, methodically driving them all to the brink of insanity. But even as he tries to warn the others, he finds himself doubting his own mind. Are the journals real, or just another figment of his fraying sanity? The faces of his friends blur together, their voices distant and distorted, like echoes from a dream. He can no longer tell if the terror he feels is real or imagined, if the island's malevolence is external, or if it's sprouting from the darkness within him. The protagonist's paranoia reaches a fever pitch. He becomes convinced that the others are plotting against him, that they're in league with the island, or worse, that they've already been consumed by it, their minds hollowed out and filled with something else. He begins to avoid them entirely, slipping away into the forest whenever they approach, watching them from the shadows with growing suspicion. He's no longer sure if he's the hunter or the hunted, if the island is manipulating him, or if he's been the monster all along. His thoughts grow more erratic, more desperate. He starts hearing his own voice in the whispers, the sibilant tones telling him to do unspeakable things. The shadows seem to follow him now, creeping closer with every step, their shapes more defined, more menacing. His reflection in the water looks back at him with hollow, haunted eyes, its expression twisted into a sneer of contempt. The protagonist knows he's losing his mind, that the island is winning, but he can't stop the spiral into darkness. The fear has consumed him, and with it the last vestiges of his sanity. In the final throes of his descent, the protagonist stumbles upon a clearing he's never seen before, though it feels disturbingly familiar, like something out of his nightmares. In the center of the clearing stands a tree, ancient and gnarled, its bark covered in the same symbols he's seen all over the island. At its base lies something he can't quite make out, a mound of earth, freshly disturbed. As he approaches, the whispers grow louder, urging him on, filling his mind with a dark, euphoric certainty that he's found the source of the island's power. With trembling hands, he begins to dig, unearthing the secrets that have haunted him since he arrived. But what he finds beneath the soil is far worse than anything he could have imagined. A revelation so horrific that it shatters the last remnants of his sanity, leaving him screaming into the void as the island's true nature is finally terrifyingly revealed. The protagonist's descent into madness accelerates as the island's dark influence tightens its grip. The thin line between reality and illusion shatters completely, leaving him trapped in a nightmarish world where every shadow holds a threat. Every sound is a harbinger of doom. His mind becomes a battlefield, a twisted landscape where the island's malevolence plays out its cruel games, blurring the distinctions between friend and foe, past and present, real and imagined. The protagonist, once a rational and grounded individual, is now a shell of his former self, consumed by the terror that stalks him at every turn. The days bleed into each other, a monotonous loop of horror that offers no respite. The sun no longer rises with the promise of a new day. Instead, it casts an eerie, blood-red glow over the island, staining the sky like a wound. The trees, once lush and green, are now twisted and blackened, their branches clawing at the sky like the gnarled fingers of the damned. The ground beneath his feet feels alive, pulsating with a sickening rhythm that matches the frantic beating of his heart. The air is thick and suffocating, filled with the stench of decay and the faint, lingering scent of something burning, something ancient and foul. The protagonist's physical appearance begins to mirror his mental decay. His eyes are bloodshot, ringed with dark circles from countless sleepless nights. His skin is pale and clammy, slick with cold sweat. His clothes hang loosely on his frame, torn and dirty, as if he's been crawling through the dirt and grime of the island's underbelly. He speaks less and less, his words slurred and nonsensical, a jumbled mix of fear and desperation. The others notice the change in him, but they're too consumed by their own fear to intervene. They keep their distance, exchanging nervous glances, their whispers growing more frequent, more fearful. The protagonist's hallucinations grow more vivid, more terrifying. He sees things that can't possibly exist. Figures made of shadow and mist, with eyes like burning coals, watching him from the tree line. The whispers that once echoed in the distance now seem to come from inside his own mind. A constant, insidious murmur that drives him to the brink of madness. The island has become a living nightmare, a hellish landscape where the laws of nature no longer apply. The protagonist is trapped in a world of shifting realities, where the ground beneath his feet could give way at any moment, plunging him into the abyss. The most terrifying part is that he can no longer trust his own senses. The once solid ground now feels unstable, as if it might open up and swallow him whole. The trees, once towering sentinels, now seem to close in on him, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands to drag him into the darkness. Even the air seems alive, thick with a malevolent energy that hums with a sinister intent. He sees faces in the clouds, twisted and grotesque, leering down at him with hollow eyes. The wind carries with it the sound of distant screams, faint but unmistakable, as if the island itself is crying out in agony. The protagonist's paranoia reaches a fever pitch. He becomes convinced that the others are conspiring against him, that they've been corrupted by the island's dark power. He avoids them as much as possible, slipping away into the forest whenever they approach. When they do manage to corner him, he lashes out, wild-eyed and frantic, his words a jumbled mix of accusations and pleas. They try to calm him, to reason with him, but their voices only fuel his paranoia. To him, they're not his friends anymore. They're agents of the island, sent to deceive him, to drag him deeper into the nightmare. At night, the terror is at its worst. The darkness is absolute, swallowing the world in a void that seems to stretch on forever. The protagonist's tent, once a sanctuary, is now a prison, a suffocating cocoon that traps him with his own fears. He hears things moving outside, the soft rustle of leaves, the crack of a branch, the sound of something large, breathing just outside the flimsy fabric walls. He tries to convince himself it's just the wind or an animal, but deep down he knows the truth. The island is alive, and it's hunting him. Sleep offers no escape. His dreams are filled with horrors that defy description, images of death and decay, of blood-soaked rituals, and ancient, malevolent beings that lurk just beyond the veil of reality. He dreams of the altar in the clearing, now covered in fresh blood, the bodies of his friends lying lifeless around it. In his dreams, the dark figure stands over them, its face hidden beneath a hood, its hands stained with blood. It turns to him, and though its face remains obscured, he feels its gaze boring into him, a gaze filled with hatred and hunger. The figure raises a hand, and the protagonist wakes with a start, his heart pounding in his chest, the image seared into his mind. The protagonist's waking hours are no better. The island is relentless, assaulting him with a constant barrage of terror. The whispers never cease, growing louder and more insistent, driving him to the edge of madness. He sees his friends, or what's left of them, moving through the forest like ghosts, their faces twisted into masks of fear and pain. They call out to him, but their voices are distorted, filled with an unnatural echo that makes his skin crawl. He tries to run, to escape the island's clutches. But no matter how far he goes, he always ends up back at the clearing, standing before the altar. The protagonist's sanity shatters. He begins to talk to himself, muttering under his breath, his thoughts disjointed and incoherent. He's no longer sure if the things he sees are real or just figments of his imagination. The line between reality and illusion has dissolved completely, leaving him adrift in a sea of terror and confusion. He stumbles through the forest, lost and alone, his mind a maze of dark thoughts and twisted visions. The island has consumed him, body and soul, leaving him a broken, terrified shell of a man. In a moment of clarity, the protagonist realizes that there's only one way out. He must confront the island, face whatever dark force has been tormenting him. With what little strength he's left, he makes his way back to the altar, the whispers now a deafening roar in his ears. The clearing is different now, the trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their branches reaching down like skeletal fingers. The sky above is dark, the clouds swirling in unnatural patterns, as if the island itself is preparing for something. The altar stands in the center, a monolith of stone, ancient and ominous. As the protagonist approaches, the dark figure emerges from the shadows, its form more distinct, more terrifying than ever. It towers over him, a being of pure malevolence, its eyes burning with a hatred that chills him to the bone. The protagonist knows in that moment that he's been lured here, that the island has been leading him to this final confrontation all along. He's no longer sure if he's awake or still trapped in a nightmare. But it doesn't matter. This is the end, and there's no escape. The figure raises its hand, and the protagonist is engulfed in darkness. He feels a cold, slimy presence wrap around him, pulling him down into the earth. The last thing he hears is the sound of the island laughing, a deep, guttural sound that echoes in his mind as he's dragged into the abyss. The world goes black, and the protagonist's last thought is one of pure, unadulterated terror, as he realizes that the island has won and that he's lost. Lost to the darkness, lost to the madness, lost to the island's insatiable hunger. The protagonist's descent into the island's darkness reaches a critical point as he becomes obsessed with uncovering the truth behind the horror that has consumed him and his friends. Every instinct tells him that understanding the enigma of the island is the only way to survive. But each new discovery only deepens the mystery and plunges him further into terror. His mind, already teetering on the edge, is now consumed by a desperate need to find answers, even as those answers threaten to destroy what little sanity he has left. Driven by a frantic urgency, the protagonist begins to piece together the fragments of the island's dark history. He returns to the ancient journals he found earlier, poring over the brittle pages with trembling hands. The accounts are maddeningly vague, filled with cryptic references to a forgotten cult, sacrifices made to appease the island's malevolent spirit, and a curse that has haunted this place for centuries. The language is archaic, filled with symbols and incantations that seem to pulse with a dark energy, making his skin crawl as he reads them. The more he uncovers, the more he feels the island's grip tightening around his mind, warping his thoughts with each revelation. His search for the truth takes him deeper into the island's twisted heart. He retraces the paths he's taken before, but they no longer lead to the same places. The island's landscape seems to shift and change at will, guiding him towards something it wants him to find. The protagonist begins to understand that the island is alive, not just in the literal sense, but in a way that defies logic. It's as if the island itself is a sentient being, an ancient entity that feeds on the fear and despair of those who dare to trespass on its soil. The realization fills him with a dread so profound that it almost paralyzes him, but he forces himself to keep moving, knowing that to stop would mean certain death, or worse. As he ventures deeper into the forest, the protagonist stumbles upon an old, overgrown trail that seems to have been deliberately hidden. The trees here are even more twisted, their branches forming a dense canopy that blocks out the light, plunging him into an oppressive darkness. The air is thick with the smell of decay, and the ground beneath his feet feels slick and unstable, as if he's walking on the remnants of something long dead. Every step feels like a descent into the underworld, with the shadows closing in around him, whispering dark secrets that make his heart pound in his chest. At the end of the trail, he finds a clearing unlike any other he's seen on the island. It's larger, more open, with a strange, unnatural symmetry that makes him feel as though he's stepped into another world. In the center of the clearing stands a structure, an ancient stone circle, its pillars carved with the same symbols he's seen in the journals. The stones are worn and weathered, but they radiate a palpable sense of power, as if they're the very heart of the island's malevolence. The air here hums with a dark energy that makes his skin prickle, and the whispers that have plagued him for days are now a cacophony, filling his mind with 1,000 voices speaking in unison. The protagonist approaches the stone circle with a mixture of awe and terror. He can feel the weight of centuries pressing down on him, the accumulated fear and suffering of all those who have come before him. As he steps closer, he sees that the ground within the circle is stained dark, as if soaked with the blood of countless victims. The stones themselves seem to pulse with a sickly light, casting eerie shadows that dance and twist as if alive. He realizes, with a cold, sinking feeling, that this is where the island's dark rituals took place, where the cultists performed their sacrifices to appease whatever dark force they worshipped. But as he examines the circle, he finds something even more disturbing. Evidence that the rituals never truly ended. Scattered around the base of the stones are remnants of more recent offerings, animal bones, tattered clothing, and other objects that seem far too modern for a place so ancient. The realization hits him like a punch to the gut. There have been others here, perhaps even in recent years, and they too fell victim to the island's curse. The thought is horrifying, but it also ignites a spark of hope. If others have been here before, perhaps there's a way to escape, a way to break the cycle of death and madness that the island has imposed. The protagonist's desperation drives him to search the area for more clues. He digs through the underbrush, uncovering fragments of the past, broken relics, scraps of paper, and more of those ancient cryptic symbols. Each discovery only raises more questions, twisting the mystery into an even tighter knot. He finds references to an ancient artifact, something that was supposedly buried deep within the island. said to hold the power to either control or destroy the dark force that rules here. But the descriptions are vague. The locations contradictory, as if the island itself is trying to protect its secrets. As night falls, the protagonist realizes that he's running out of time. The island's power is growing stronger, the whispers louder and more insistent. He feels the ground beneath him begin to tremble, the air thickening with a palpable sense of dread. The stones in the circle seem to glow brighter, their light casting long, distorted shadows that twist and writhe like living things. The protagonist knows he must act quickly, but the more he tries to piece together the clues, the more confused he becomes. The symbols blur before his eyes, the words in the journals twist into incomprehensible gibberish. The island is playing with him, toying with his mind, leading him deeper into the labyrinth of terror from which there may be no escape. In a final, desperate act, the protagonist decides to perform a ritual of his own, hoping to either summon or banish the dark force that haunts the island. He gathers the objects he's found, bones, relics, and the remnants of previous sacrifices, and arranges them within the stone circle. His hands shake as he traces the ancient symbols in the dirt, chanting the words he barely understands, words that seem to rise unbidden from the depths of his mind. The island responds immediately, the ground shaking violently, the sky above darkening as if a storm is about to break. The whispers rise to a deafening roar, and the stones pulse with an otherworldly light. But instead of the release he hoped for, the protagonist finds himself plunged into a nightmare. The ground beneath the stone circle opens up, revealing a chasm filled with darkness so profound it seems to devour the very light around it. From the chasm emerges the figure he has seen in his dreams, now fully formed and terrifyingly real. It is a creature of shadow and smoke, its eyes burning with a malevolent intelligence, its form shifting and changing as if it is made of the very essence of the island itself. The air crackles with dark energy, and the protagonist is paralyzed with fear, unable to move, unable to think, as the figure steps toward him. In that moment, the protagonist realizes the truth. The island is not just a place, but a living entity, a malevolent being that feeds on fear, despair, and death. The figure before him is its heart, its soul, the embodiment of everything dark and evil that has ever happened here. The realization is too much for his mind to bear, and he feels his sanity slipping away. The last fragile thread snapping under the weight of the horror he now understands. As the figure reaches out to him, the protagonist screams, a sound of pure terror that echoes through the clearing and is swallowed by the chasm below. The last thing he sees before the darkness takes him is the figure's face, or what passes for a face, twisting into a grotesque parody of a smile. The ground closes up around him, and he is plunged into the abyss, into the very heart of the island's darkness, where no light, no hope, and no escape exist. The enigma of the island remains, an unsolvable puzzle that has claimed yet another victim. The protagonist's fate is sealed, his mind and body consumed by the island's insatiable hunger. The stone circle stands silent once more, its secrets buried deep within the earth, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble upon them. And the island continues its eternal watch, a predator in the guise of paradise, always hungry, always waiting. The climax of the protagonist's journey through the island's nightmare begins as he confronts the full, horrifying truth of what the island truly is. The air is thick with tension, the oppressive weight of the island's malevolence pressing down on him like a vice. His breath comes in ragged gasps, his heart pounding in his chest as he stands at the edge of the stone circle, the remnants of his desperate ritual scattered at his feet. The figure before him, the embodiment of the island's dark power, looms large, a shadowy, shifting mass that seems to suck the light from the very air around it. Its form is amorphous, constantly shifting and changing, as if it is made of the island's very essence. Smoke, darkness, and the echoes of countless tortured souls. As the figure steps forward, the protagonist feels an overwhelming sense of dread, a primal fear that grips him to his core. The air crackles with dark energy, a low hum that vibrates through his bones and rattles his teeth. The ground beneath his feet trembles, as if the island itself is reacting to the presence of this ancient, malevolent force. He can barely think, barely breathe, as the figure draws closer, its presence filling the clearing with a suffocating sense of doom. The figure's face, or what passes for a face, is a grotesque, ever-changing mask, its features shifting and distorting in ways that defy logic. One moment, it is a skull, grinning with hollow, empty eyes, and the next it is a twisted parody of a human face, with too many eyes and a mouth that stretches impossibly wide. Its gaze is cold, merciless, filled with a hatred that seems to radiate from the very core of the island. The protagonist feels as though it is staring directly into his soul, seeing every fear, every doubt, every moment of weakness, and feeding on them, growing stronger with each passing second. The whispers that have plagued the protagonist since his arrival on the island rise to a deafening crescendo, a cacophony of voices speaking in unison, their words incomprehensible, yet filled with malice. They swirl around him, burrowing into his mind, filling his thoughts with images of death and despair. He sees the faces of his friends, twisted in pain and terror, their bodies broken and lifeless at the foot of the altar. He sees the island as it was centuries ago, a place of dark rituals and blood sacrifices, where the figure before him was worshipped as a god, its followers offering their lives in exchange for power and immortality. The protagonist tries to resist, to push the voices away, but they are relentless, hammering at the walls of his mind until they finally break through. He feels his sanity slipping away, his thoughts unraveling as the island's dark power takes hold of him. The ground beneath him seems to shift and twist, the stone circle warping into a nightmarish landscape where the laws of reality no longer apply. The trees around the clearing stretch impossibly high, their branches curling like claws, reaching down to pull him into the darkness. The sky above roils with black clouds, shot through with flashes of sickly green lightning, as if the heavens themselves are reacting to the presence of the dark figure. In a final, desperate attempt to save himself, the protagonist reaches for the last remnants of his humanity, clinging to the memories of his life before the island, his friends, his family, the dreams he once had. But even these are tainted by the island's influence, twisted into grotesque parodies of themselves. He sees his family standing before him, their faces melting and reforming into hideous shapes, their eyes filled with hatred. His friends appear as they were in life, but their bodies are broken and bloody, their mouths stretched into unnatural grins as they mock him, their voices echoing the whispers that have tormented him for so long. The protagonist realizes with a sense of crushing despair that there is no escape. The island has taken everything from him, his sanity, his friends, his very sense of self. He is nothing but a vessel for the island's dark power, a plaything for the malevolent force that has ruled this place for centuries. The figure before him reaches out, its hand, or what passes for a hand, stretching impossibly long, its fingers like tendrils of shadow that wrap around the protagonist's body, pulling him closer. The cold touch of the figure sends a shock of pain through him, as if his very soul is being torn apart. As the figure's grip tightens, the protagonist's mind shatters completely. He is plunged into a world of pure terror, where reality and nightmare merge into one. He sees visions of endless darkness, of a void filled with the screams of the damned, their voices echoing through the eternity of the island's cursed existence. He is no longer himself, no longer human, but a part of the island, a fragment of its eternal nightmare. The figure's face looms before him, its eyes burning with a cold, pitiless light. And he knows that he is lost, that there is no salvation, no escape. In that final moment, as the darkness closes in around him, the protagonist's last thought is one of pure, unadulterated terror. He understands with a clarity born of madness that the island's power is absolute. its hunger insatiable. He is just one of many who have fallen victim to its curse, one of countless souls lost to the void. The figure's grip tightens and the protagonist is consumed, his mind and body dissolving into the darkness, leaving nothing behind but a faint echo of the person he once was. The clearing falls silent, the whispers fading into the stillness of the night. The stone circle stands as it always has, ancient and immovable, a monument to the island's dark power. The figure recedes into the shadows, its work complete, leaving the clearing empty once more. The island, ever patient, waits for the next soul to stumble upon its shores, its hunger never sated, its secrets never fully revealed. The protagonist's story ends here, swallowed by the island's eternal darkness. The terror he experienced, the horrors he uncovered, are now just another part of the island's enigma, a mystery that will continue to draw the unwary, the curious, the desperate into its grasp. And as the night deepens, the island sleeps, its dreams filled with the memories of those it has claimed, its whispers carried on the wind, a haunting melody that will echo through the ages. The confrontation has ended, but the protagonist's ordeal is far from over. As he regains consciousness, the world around him is shrouded in a suffocating darkness that feels alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy that seems to seep into his very soul. The clearing is eerily quiet, the oppressive silence broken only by the faint rustle of the wind through the twisted branches of the trees. The stone circle, once a place of ancient ritual, now feels like a tomb, a prison that has trapped him within the island's dark embrace. The protagonist stumbles to his feet, his body aching and his mind shattered by the horrors he has witnessed. The figure that had confronted him is gone, but its presence lingers in the air, a cold, suffocating force that seems to weigh him down with every step. The ground beneath him is slick with mud, and as he moves, his feet sink into the earth as if the island itself is trying to pull him under, to swallow him whole. Every instinct tells him to run, to flee this cursed place, but there is nowhere to go, no escape from the island's grasp. As he staggers through the forest, the protagonist realizes with growing dread that the island has changed. The landscape, once familiar, is now an alien, nightmarish terrain that defies logic and reason. The trees are taller, their branches gnarled and twisted into grotesque shapes that seem to reach out for him, their bark covered in strange, pulsating growths that ooze a foul-smelling liquid. The path he once followed is gone, replaced by a maze of narrow, winding trails that twist and turn in impossible directions, leading him deeper into the heart of the island's darkness. The air is thick with the stench of decay, and as the protagonist moves forward, he begins to notice the remains of those who came before him. Half-buried skeletons, shattered bones, and fragments of clothing, all rotting away in the damp earth. The sight fills him with a sense of hopelessness, a realization that he is just another in a long line of victims, drawn to the island by the same malevolent force that now threatens to consume him. But even as despair grips his heart, the protagonist cannot stop, driven by a primal need to survive, to find a way out of this nightmare. As he presses on, the whispers return, louder and more insistent than ever. They echo through the forest, their voices a chorus of torment and anguish, speaking in a language that he cannot understand yet feels deeply in his bones. The words seep into his mind, filling it with images of death and destruction, of blood-soaked altars and ancient rituals performed under a blood-red moon. He sees the faces of the island's victims, their eyes hollow and filled with despair, their mouths twisted into silent screams of agony. The whispers taunt him, telling him that there is no escape, that the island has claimed him as it has claimed so many others before him. The protagonist's mind begins to fracture under the weight of the island's terror. He starts to see things that cannot possibly be real. Figures moving through the trees, their eyes glowing with a sinister light. Shadows that stretch and warp, taking on monstrous forms that stalk him through the forest. He hears footsteps behind him, the sound of something large and heavy moving through the underbrush. But when he turns, There is nothing there. The island is toying with him, pushing him to the brink of madness, feeding on his fear and despair. In a moment of clarity, the protagonist realizes that the island is not just a place, but a living entity, a malevolent force that feeds on the souls of those who dare to trespass on its land. The island is a predator, and he is its prey, trapped in a game that he cannot win. The thought fills him with a cold, numbing terror, but it also ignites a spark of defiance deep within him. He refuses to go down without a fight, to let the island consume him without resistance. He will find a way out, or die, trying. But as he searches for an escape, the island's power only grows stronger. The forest seems to close in around him, the trees pressing closer, their branches forming a canopy that blocks out the sky, plunging him into an impenetrable darkness. The ground beneath his feet shifts and cracks, the earth opening up to reveal yawning chasms that seem to stretch down into the very bowels of the island. The air is thick with a palpable sense of dread, and the protagonist feels as though he is being watched from all sides, hunted by something unseen, yet all too real. The whispers grow louder, more frantic, filling his mind with a cacophony of voices that drown out his thoughts, driving him to the edge of sanity. He stumbles through the forest, his vision blurred, his body weak and trembling with exhaustion. The world around him warps and distorts, the trees bending and twisting into impossible shapes, the ground shifting beneath his feet like a living thing. The island is no longer just a place. It is a nightmare made real, a hellish landscape that mirrors the darkest corners of his mind. In his delirium, the protagonist comes upon a cave, its entrance hidden behind a curtain of vines and thorns. The sight of it fills him with a sense of dread so profound that he nearly turns away. But something compels him to enter. The cave is dark and cold, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. As he moves deeper into the darkness, the whispers follow him, growing louder and more frenzied until they are a deafening roar in his ears. The cave walls are covered in strange symbols, the same ancient markings he has seen throughout the island. And as he reaches out to touch them, he feels a jolt of electricity course through his body, as if the very rock is alive with dark energy. At the end of the cave, the protagonist finds what he has been searching for, the heart of the island, the source of its malevolent power. It is a massive stone altar, similar to the one he encountered before, but far more ancient and sinister. The air around it hums with a dark energy, and the ground beneath it is stained with blood, fresh and old, mingling together in a sickening pool. The whispers reach a fever pitch, the voices now clear and unmistakable, urging him to complete the ritual, to offer himself to the island, to become one with the darkness that rules this place. The protagonist falls to his knees before the altar, his mind shattered, his body weak and trembling. He knows that he is at the end, that there is no escape, no salvation. The island has claimed him, as it has claimed so many before, and there is nothing left but to submit to its will. But even as the darkness closes in around him, a spark of defiance flares within him. He refuses to give in, to let the island consume him without a fight. With the last of his strength, he reaches out to the altar, determined to destroy it, to end the island's reign of terror once and for all. But as his hand touches the stone, he feels a cold, suffocating presence envelop him. The island's dark power floods into him, filling him with an overwhelming sense of despair and hopelessness. The whispers become screams, filling his mind with a torrent of pain and anguish, the voices of the island's countless victims crying out for release. The ground beneath him cracks open, the earth swallowing the altar, and the protagonist along with it. He is plunged into the abyss, into the very heart of the island's darkness, where there is no light, no hope, no escape. As the darkness consumes him, the protagonist's last thought is one of pure, unrelenting terror. He understands now that the island is eternal, that its power cannot be destroyed, only appeased. He is just one more soul lost to its hunger, one more sacrifice to the endless cycle of death and despair that has played out on this cursed land for centuries. The island has won, and there is nothing left but the cold, empty void of oblivion. The cave falls silent, the whispers fading into the stillness of the night. The island, ever patient, waits for its next victim, its hunger never sated, its secrets never fully revealed. And somewhere in the darkness, the faint echo of the protagonist's scream lingers. A haunting reminder of the terror that awaits those who dare to venture onto the island of secrets. The protagonist's final descent into the island's darkness has left him teetering on the brink of madness, his mind fractured by the horrors he has witnessed. The oppressive weight of the island's malevolence is omnipresent, seeping into every corner of his consciousness. Yet, as the abyss threatens to consume him entirely, something unexpected happens. He awakens, lying on the forest floor, the island bathed in the soft light of dawn. The birds are singing, the sky is clear, and the nightmare seems to have evaporated like morning mist. But the protagonist knows better. The island's tranquility is a facade, a thin veneer hiding the true terror that lurks beneath. The first thing he notices is the silence. Though the birds chirp and the wind rustles through the leaves, there is an unnatural stillness in the air, as if the island itself is holding its breath, waiting. The events of the previous night feel like a distant dream. The memory of the stone circle, the whispers, and the dark figure all but fading. But the protagonist can still feel the cold, clammy touch of the island on his skin, the oppressive dread that has settled into his bones. He stands, unsteady, his body aching as if he has been through a war, and surveys his surroundings. The forest looks different now, less menacing, but no less strange. The trees seem to lean in toward him, their branches twisting in ways that defy nature, casting long, warped shadows on the ground. As he moves through the forest, the protagonist is haunted by a deep, gnawing unease. The path he follows is familiar, yet somehow changed, as if the island is toying with him, altering reality to suit its whims. He tries to recall how he ended up here, but his memories are fragmented, disjointed, snatches of images, sounds, and sensations that make no sense. He remembers the cave, the stone altar, the dark figure, but the details are hazy, slipping through his mind like sand through his fingers. The more he tries to piece together what happened, the more confused he becomes, until he's left questioning whether any of it was real at all. The whispers are gone, replaced by an unsettling calm that hangs over the island like a shroud. Yet, the protagonist can't shake the feeling that he's being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch underfoot makes him jump, his heart racing as he glances over his shoulder, expecting to see the dark figure looming behind him. But there's nothing there, just the empty forest, stretching on endlessly in every direction. The island's secrets remain hidden, buried deep within its twisted heart, and the protagonist knows that he is no closer to understanding them than when he first arrived. The others are gone, vanished without a trace. Their tents are still there, their belongings scattered as if they left in a hurry, but there's no sign of them. No footprints, no blood, nothing to suggest what happened. The protagonist searches the camp, his desperation mounting with each passing moment, but it's as if his friends never existed at all. He calls out their names, his voice echoing through the trees, but the only response is the distant cry of a bird, the wind whispering through the leaves. The island has swallowed them whole, erasing them from existence, leaving the protagonist alone with his fear and his doubts. Time seems to lose all meaning as he wanders the island, searching for answers that never come. Days blur into nights, and the sun rises and sets. Without him noticing, the passage of time, a cruel joke played by the island's twisted reality. He finds himself back at the stone circle more than once, the ancient stones standing silent and immovable, their surfaces slick with moisture as if they're sweating in the island's oppressive heat. Each time he returns, he feels a deep sense of dread, as if the stones are watching him, judging him, waiting for him to complete the ritual he began. But the altar's empty, the dark figure gone, and the island offers no clues, no signs of what he must do next. The protagonist's mind begins to unravel, his thoughts spiraling into madness as the island's grip tightens. He starts to doubt his own sanity, questioning whether he ever left the stone circle at all, or if this is just another of the island's cruel illusions. The faces of his friends haunt him, their eyes hollow and accusing, their mouths twisted into silent screams. He sees them in the shadows, in the twisted branches of the trees, in the reflection of the water, but when he reaches out to them, they vanish, leaving him alone with his guilt and his fear. The island is in his mind now, a parasite feeding on his despair, twisting his thoughts and memories until he no longer knows what is real and what is a product of his deteriorating sanity. And yet there are moments when the protagonist feels a strange sense of calm, as if the island is lulling him into submission. He hears the whispers again, faint and distant, but instead of terror, they bring a strange comfort, a sense of inevitability. The island is won, it seems to say, and there's no point in fighting. The protagonist feels a heavy weariness settle over him, a bone-deep exhaustion that makes him want to lie down and sleep, to let the island take him, to become one with its darkness. But something deep inside him resists, a flicker of defiance that refuses to be snuffed out, no matter how hopeless the situation seems. In the end, the protagonist finds himself standing at the edge of the island, the sea stretching out before him, calm and infinite. The horizon is blurred, as if the world beyond the island is just a mirage, a place that no longer exists. He feels the pull of the water, the temptation to step off the edge and let the sea take him, to end the nightmare once and for all. But as he stands there, teetering on the brink, he realizes that the island isn't finished with him yet. There is no escape, no release. The island's grip is too strong, its power too vast, and it will not let him go until it has consumed every last piece of him. With a heavy heart, the protagonist turns away from the sea, back towards the forest, the stone circle, the darkness. He knows that the island will keep him here, trapped in its web of terror and mystery, until the day he dies. But even then, he will not be free. His soul, like the souls of all those who came before him, will be absorbed into the island, becoming part of its eternal nightmare. He will join the chorus of whispers, his voice adding to the cacophony of despair that haunts the island's shadows. A warning to those who might one day find themselves in his place. The story ends not with a resolution, but with a lingering sense of unease. The protagonist's fate is left deliberately ambiguous. Has he succumbed to the island's darkness, or is he still fighting, clinging to the last shreds of his sanity? The island remains an enigma, its true nature never fully revealed, its secrets buried deep within its twisted heart. The terror does not end with the story. It lingers, haunting the reader long after the final words have been read. The island's whispers continue, faint but insistent, a reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved, some horrors never meant to be understood.